What does home truly mean to you? I mean, for many of us, it's just there, a safe, affordable place. But for millions, that's not a given at all. It's a daily struggle. Today, we're going to dig into a really important report. It's from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, just published January 24th, 2025. And our mission here is to really unpack what they found. They analyzed how certain executive actions, if they're implemented, could seriously affect housing affordability, homelessness, really across the whole country. We want to pull out the key takeaways, understand what the potential effects might be for people, for communities.
Yeah, and to really get why this report matters, you need to understand the situation before these potential actions were even on the table. The coalition, they point out that when this administration started, you already had over 10 million households, the lowest income ones, paying like over half their income just on rent.
Yeah,
Severely cost burden.
half their income. Wow.
Exactly. And despite that need, the report says 3 out of 4 families who should get housing assistance can't get it. Why? Not enough funding. It's been like that for a while. So they're basically one emergency, one missed paycheck away from potentially losing their home.
Or ending up homeless.
Right. And the scale is just huge. The report mentions 770,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. It's already incredibly tough. So how does this report argue that these specific executive actions might make things worse? Not just fail to help, but actually worsen the crisis. What's the main thrust of their argument?
Well, the core argument presented in the report is that these actions, they don't really get at the root causes of the housing crisis, the systemic stuff. Instead, the report suggests they risk taking apart some of the frameworks and supports that are already in place.
So it's not just about not doing new things, it's potentially undoing things that might be helping or could help.
That seems to be the perspective, yes. Let's look at the first big one they identify. It's a directive for federal agencies to basically end all diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility practices, DEIA, and also to cancel previous executive actions that were meant to expand those DEI efforts specifically for underserved communities.
So the report isn't seeing DEIA as just some sort of, optional add-on. It sounds like they're arguing it's fundamental to even understanding the problem correctly. Is that the connection they're making?
That's exactly the report's angle. They see shutting down DEIA as something that directly undermines efforts to deal with, well, historic and ongoing systemic racism. It impacts having a diverse federal workforce, and maybe most importantly here, enforcing fair housing and civil rights laws.
Because the crisis doesn't hit everyone equally.
Precisely. The report really emphasizes that Black communities, Indigenous communities, other communities of color are disproportionately affected by the housing crisis. So from the coalition's perspective, if you don't have that commitment to DEIA, you're not addressing the underlying inequities. And they argue you can't fully end the crisis without doing that.
Okay, that connects the policy to the sort of foundational principles. But what about the nuts and bolts? The agencies doing the work. The report mentions an executive action for a hiring freeze, specifically at HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. What does the report say about the practical effects of that, especially if they're already stretched thin?
Yeah, it's an interesting point in the report. They describe HUD staff as, really dedicated, lots of expertise,
Yeah.
but also facing real challenges. Under-resourced, understaffed, overworked. That's the picture painted.
Sort of a hiring freeze on top of that.
Exactly. The report suggests a freeze would stop HUD from hiring people they really need, essential staff. And that slowdown, well, it impacts their ability to help states, help communities, get funding out, provide technical support, basically tackle those urgent housing needs on the ground. It affects their capacity.
Right. Less capacity means slower help, or maybe no help in some cases. Then the report turns to another area, raising concerns about protections for marginalized groups. It mentions the reported denial of fair housing and civil rights protections for LGBTQ individuals, and specifically a directive for HUD to rescind protections for transgender people who are homeless and looking for shelter.
Yes, that's highlighted.
What are the core worries the report details there? What's the potential human cost?
Well, the immediate concern raised in the report is pretty stark. It could mean more people ending up in unsheltered homelessness, literally on the street, which, puts lives directly at risk. It's about whether someone can access a safe place in a moment of crisis.
And the report argues denying that based on identity goes against the goal of ending homelessness itself.
That's the connection they make, yes. Denying refuge based on who someone is.
Okay, moving from individual protections to sort of community-level funding. The report analyzes an executive order about sanctuary jurisdictions. These are places, the report clarifies, that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. The order aims to prevent them from getting federal funds.
Correct. The order directs agencies to block these jurisdictions from receiving critical federal investments.
So how does the report see this impacting local housing efforts?
The warning in the report is that if this is used to cut off federal housing money, homelessness assistance funds, community development grants, it would really hit local governments hard. It undermines their ability to, say, help families buy homes, build more affordable apartments, or run programs to prevent and end homelessness locally.
So it potentially takes away the tools localities use to address their own housing problems.
That's the concern raised, yes. Withdrawing essential resources needed for local solutions.
And there's one more related action the report looks at, concerning immigration enforcement. It focuses on rescinding guidelines that used to prohibit arresting undocumented people in what are called sensitive areas. What areas does the report include in that, and what are the implications?
According to the report, these sensitive areas are places like disaster relief centers, after a hurricane or fire,
Yeah.
domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, places people go when they're in crisis.
Places of refuge, essentially.
Exactly. And the implications, as the report lays them out, are described as severe, allowing immigration enforcement into these specific locations. The report frames it as cruelly denying immigrant families, including kids who are U.S. citizens, safety. It creates intense fear.
Fear that stops people from seeking help.
That's the danger highlighted. That people, families needing urgent help, shelter from abuse, help after a disaster would be too scared to go to these places. It leaves them with nowhere safe to turn. Imagine fleeing violence and the shelter itself feels unsafe for a different reason.
When you step back and look at all these potential actions together, it's laid out in the report, it really brings home that these aren't just abstract policy debates, are they? They touch the actual safety nets in our communities, the resources available when people are at their most vulnerable.
Definitely.
It makes you think about how fragile stability is for so many people and what it means for society if places that are supposed to be safe havens suddenly aren't perceived that way or become actual targets.
And just to sum up the report's main conclusions from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, their bottom line is that these executive actions, as they analyze them, don't address the deep-seated causes of the housing crisis in America. Instead, the report argues they actually make it harder for states and communities to deal with these challenges. They could potentially make things worse.
And it's interesting context that the high cost of housing was, a really big issue for voters in the 2024 election. People made it pretty clear they want policymakers to find real solutions to actually move the needle on this.
Which leads to a final thought, really. If tackling the housing crisis needs everyone working together, needs strong support systems for people who are struggling, what happens in the long run, thinking about the human cost, the economic cost, if policies are put in place that seem designed to take apart existing protections or that create fear?
Yeah. What does it actually take to build a society where everyone truly has an affordable, accessible place they can call home? Something to think about.